And I would like to start with our land acknowledgement to acknowledge that York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I would like to welcome you all to our last colloquium presentation for the year, and we are delighted to have with us today Dr. Yasodara Kathirgamathamby. She's currently a visiting scholar here at the Center for Refugee Studies and is a senior lecturer in legal studies at the Open University of Sri Lanka and a scholar in gender, human rights, and migration. She served on numerous national committees and expert panels, including chairing gender equality under the Ministry of Estate Infrastructure and Water Supply, focusing on rights of upcountry Tamil women. She's also moderated and spoken at numerous national and international forums on her research areas. Her work includes research, policy analysis, and advocacy with publications in these same areas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Yasodara, and we very much looking forward to this presentation today.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Let me share my screen. Hope everyone can see my screen, right?
Yes. You just need to put it in slideshow.
Yeah, wait a minute. Fine, right? Okay, thank you for the introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank the Center for Refugee Studies, York University, giving me an opportunity to work as a visiting scholar from 1st October. And my last day would be tomorrow, the 10th of December. So with that, I would like to start my this discussion. The title is Human Trafficking Victims' Rights Under Canadian Law, Lessons for Sri Lanka. So I would like to give what is the justification that I have chosen, to learn some best practices from Canada is, the main reason is, Canada is now, according to the United States Trafficking in Persons report, the latest report 2025, Canada is considered under the tier 1. So it categories are, there are 3 categories under the State Department: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So tier 1 mean the states which adhere to the minimum standards that are necessary to eradicating trafficking. Tier 2 is considerable number of measures have been taken, but more to be done. And the third one, tier 3, mean poor measures on eradicating. So Canada was there, I think, in tier 2, and later it has been upgraded to tier 1. So Canada is meeting the minimum standards, and also some good practices are adopted with regard to protection of traffic victims. So that is the reason, one reason. And another reason, as we know, Canada is also one of the major destination for human smugglers and traffickers, because women and children and men are being trafficked. And also for the through educational opportunities, there are students also coming to Canada. They are being exploited sexually, and they are subject to sexual and labor exploitation. So that is the reason. Those are the 2 main reasons I have taken Canada. So let me begin my presentation. So I will give little bit of the introduction about what is trafficking, and then international legal framework briefly, and the magnitude of the problem in Sri Lanka, and also what are the best practices that we can learn, and then a few recommendations. So what is human trafficking, first of all? Because it's in the large scale of migration, the trafficking is one aspect. It comes as a irregular or way of migrants or illegal migrations. Actually, trafficking is facilitated by organized criminal groups for the purpose of making profit the purpose are different. Like you can see the pictures, the purpose actually sexual exploitation, forced labor, debt bondage, domestic servitude, organ removal, forced begging, child soldiers, forced marriage. So these are for these purposes. Actually, the whole every if you see everything, it all comes under the one umbrella term, exploitation. So for the purpose of exploitations, people are being trafficked to. The trafficked. There are two categories: internal as well as the cross-border trafficking. Um, now, child, according to UNODC, later United Nations Office of the Drugs of Crime 24, child trafficking, forced labor, criminality is rising. So the cause is due to poverty, climate change, and other conflicts, and also globally the number of incidents being increased. When you compare with pre-pandemic levels in 2009 also, and the causes for trafficking are different. There are pull factors as well as the push factors for trafficking. So when it comes to Canada, it's a major destination and a lesser extent, so is a source country, according to Tier 1 Tip Report 25. And Sri Lanka is a major source country. We are producing number of human traffic victims, and lesser extents transit and destination. So now recently we see there are number of people are being trafficked from Southeast Asia and other South Asian nations like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, for construction industry, because now Sri Lankans are moving legally or illegally, moving developed countries and Middle East countries for seeking employments. So we have shortages in construction industry. So for cheap labor, these human beings are from other neighboring states are being trafficked. And also more vulnerable are women and girls. It's around the world. And Canada, indigenous communities, immigrants, LGBTQ, and persons with disabilities are more vulnerable. In Sri Lankan context, the plantation community, they actually migrated from India. They are living in the upcountry area. It is hill station. Majority of them are working in the plantation. So they are having a lot of issues, livelihood, health issues, and they have problem with access to education, healthcare. So these people are being targeted, and the Tamils from war affected area, north and east. And also because the ethnic community, there are major three ethnic communities, and Sinhalese from low income groups. But the interesting to note that Muslim community is not much targeted, because they are not really working outside, not really willing to work outside the outside home as well as outside the country. So therefore mainly there are few, but mainly the Tamils and Sinhalese are targeted by the human traffickers. So the research problem of my research is that now, despite we have criminal code, criminal penal code, and also Victim Protection Comprehensive Act 23, recent act, despite adopting these measures, we have still faces major challenges in identification of traffic victims, provide effective protections and access to justice. So the reasons are weak implementation, limited victim-centered approach, and inadequate prosecution practices. And so for these reasons, the survivors they are without meaningful remedies and rehabilitation. So therefore, we need to have a robust mechanisms. So therefore, I just through research, I'm just learning what are the best practices that from Canada's victim protection mechanisms that can strengthen Sri Lanka's response. Now, the major objective of my research is to examine the victim protection mechanisms in Canada and then identify best practices, actually the context specific recommendations, because I can't take everything, whatever available here, because Sri Lanka is a developing country and it's a developed country we have, but context specific certain recommendations I am planning to adopt. So it comes to international legal framework, even globally, the human trafficking was given attention in 2000, right? So the first time United Nations adopted a particular convention and a protocol to address transnational organized crime. So we know 1948 we have the UDHR, and continuously we have other human rights conventions, but this is a serious human rights violation issues as well as the criminal issue. So first time, so the UN adopted the transnational organized crime convention, and also the protocol or addressing trafficking, human trafficking. This is considered as a transnational crime. So as I mentioned, internal trafficking, there are two types: internal trafficking as well as cross-border trafficking. These two documents, I mean these instruments, mainly focusing on transnational, because it's cross-border migration, cross-border trafficking affects the national security, it affects the diplomatic relations, economic relations, and the employment opportunities of the domestic, citizens. So these are so therefore the international community realized that we need to have a concrete measures. So in order to implement these two instruments, international cooperation is very much important. No country in isolation cannot take any issue, address these issues, because now, as if I take Sri Lanka for an example, now we have a lot of issues, so we didn't rely on international cooperation for, even for the investigation, identification of perpetrators, victims, and all these capacity building. So international cooperation is very much so. The international legal framework actually stress on international cooperation. So to what extent we are getting the international cooperation also is a question, because of some there are various reasons. So the protocol defines what is this crime, what's the crime, and also it gives there are two objectives: penalize the crime and protects the victims' rights, because they are more vulnerable. But when we look at the international, the protocol, there are only one provision which discuss about Article 6, talk about the rights of, victims, traffic victims. So therefore we are heavily rely on the other international human rights instruments, particularly if children and, women are vulnerable. We need to look at the CEDAW and the CRC for that matter. So when it comes to the domestic legal framework, Canada has, federal, arrangements as well as the provincial level laws. Mainly the federal legislations in regard to penalizing, the federal legislation, Criminal Code and IRPA 2002, and Human Rights Charter, Victims' Rights Bill. So it's all rights of victims. The provincial laws actually have very good practice, like Manitoba, BC, Alberta. Provincial laws considered as victim protections. But when it comes to Sri Lanka also, now only in 2006 we brought a section to 360 to the penal code. So it's also very late, like 2006. That also because we got a repeated request from the destination nations like Italy, Austria, Australia, because since we don't have a law, there are a lot of issues for them also. So and also we have standard operating procedures and the other assistance to victims and witnesses. So I would say that as far as the legal provisions are concerned, Sri Lanka does not have much problem. But when it comes to implementations and providing victim protection, so we have a lot of problems. So when the challenges, when you challenges now, identification, investigation, and prosecution. Now identification of both perpetrators and victims, as it is a complex crime, it's a transnational crime. The organized criminal groups are scattered, in different countries. The identification of perpetrators is a serious issue, because we need international cooperation. When it comes to international cooperation, so it's not, I mean, it's straight away that we can, because it's different legal systems. We want to have bilateral agreements to get mutual legal assistance. It's a tedious process, right? So it comes through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Attorney General. Each country has its own arrangements. So therefore, the perpetrators also know the loopholes or the the stringent procedure. So it's easy for them to kind of escape from the legal prosecutions and the convictions, and that is the main reasons, the conviction and the investigation prosecution. So this is a common issue for everywhere. But I think Canada, in according to tip report 25, we can see 20 like 22, 23, 24, gradually the number identification of perpetrators, victims, and the investigation and prosecution gradually increasing. So it's a good sign, gradually increasing. But as far as the Sri Lanka is concerned, still we are struggling for various reasons. I think last year it was only six convictions, right? Six convictions. In Canada, I think almost like 63 convictions, according to the TIP report. And the other major challenge is lack of awareness. Now, among the general public and state officials. Now, we need to educate the general public, because the main problem in Sri Lanka is that through recruitment agencies, women and people are being trafficked. So the recruitment agent, therefore, the general public do not have much understanding about the registered, recruitment agencies, and they do not have knowledge the risk surrounded, in this particular problem, and also state officials. Now, Canada, for that matter, the frontline officers are given, a good amount of training and awareness program, because there are a lot of intelligence, undercover operations, collection of evidence, and all these things are involved. But in the Sri Lankan context, the state officials have lacking knowledge, particularly from the Criminal Investigations Department and in other law enforcement department. And also, when it comes to identification of victims, unidentified, sometimes there is a misidentification, right? Uh, because of lack of knowledge. Now, for example, if they come from abroad, a traffic victim, the first point that in Sri Lanka they meet is the immigrants and immigrants department. The immigrants and immigrants department should be given training about the indicators of identification of a particular individual, right? They can just sometimes visible injuries, or because they speak with fear, they don't utter word any, sometimes they don't even look at the face of the officer, and they, so the behavior and then at least the indicator shows that they had some problem. So the US State Department had developed some of the indicators that has to be those indicators should be taught to the officers, because they should learn about that. So therefore, sometimes they don't identify. If they don't identify, so the straight away they go home and they mingle with the society. Then later we can identify with them with STD, HIV, and other social issues. Right? Sometimes what happens is that there are other victims. Those are really not trafficked victims. So because other administrative issues they would have faced in the host country, so they misidentify them as traffic victims. So that is also a serious issue. And another important thing, assistance is provided mainly to victims who cooperate with the prosecution, because there is a bias. Now, when you provide protection, assistance to traffic victims, equally it should be, given to everyone. But here, what happens is they try, because the prosecution also wants to finish the cases, because they are also under pressure that they need to do something. So therefore, they priority is given to those kind of victims. So another important, the confidentiality and the safety of the victims are very important, because they should not be exposed to public. What happens is, now when the victims are arrested, the media immediately, because the media ethics, we need to improve that also. They sometimes with the name, they, or even without the name, they can give their address, the their the vicinity, everything. So somebody can even assume who has been arrested. So therefore, when their identities are revealed outside, so they are under threat and they don't give cooperation, and even they don't come to get the services, they try to hide themselves. So that is one another problem. And the very sad to see no dedicated shelters for victims. So I think in Canada it's a very good thing. What I look at here is that there are different kinds of shelters immediately, I mean emergency shelters and long term shelters. These shelters provide counseling and job training opportunity. But I would say there are challenges even in Canada. There are sometimes services are uneven in provinces, there are problems, but still it's very important that the shelters are available, because shelter is a fundamental need for a traffic victim. The reason, because unless and until you don't give the physical protections, they are not in a positions to come and give information, or even they try to get the services from, right? Because they are fear vulnerable, right? Women and children, even sometimes labor trafficking men, so they are vulnerable, because these traffickers or organized criminal groups are so powerful. So therefore they can do anything, right? So therefore they need to give the shelter, but no dedicated shelter. Now I actually gathered information from Sri Lankan victim protection authority national. So I, through the RTI application, right information, so only according to them, only one shelter is available, which is also allocated only for the gender-based victim (GBV), and only 8 people can accommodate. But I think last year we were, I think in Sri Lanka, I think we identified around 200 or 300 victims identified. Now, my question is how these people can be accommodated, where they will be accommodated. So, what is how we are going to provide protection for them? What is their future? So, there is no dedicated shelter, and that shelter is only for GBV. Actually, traffic victims have no space to go. And then even in the victims whatever the shelter, when you, because the trauma that they have undergone, you need to give a very good counseling and other support services. So the victim protection authority only have two counselors, one is a female and the other one male. So they have backlog of cases, and because they have to look at all the victims issues including traffic victims, so limited counseling and support services. And the compensation for victim is also inadequate, financial, and sometimes they cannot get. But in Canada, the very important aspect that I look at, some of the provinces have provisions to sue, I mean civil remedy. They can go to civil courts, ask for a compensation from the perpetrator. So that is a very another good thing that I saw. And also official complicity that is there, and lack of knowledge among judges, immigration office, service providers, and other frontline officers. So, considering this, our university, we offered a 3-month certificate course for the immigration officers, and also for the other civil society organizations on this area. 3 years we have done. And also then other training like IOM is done. And also USAID, under the USAID fund, there are number of projects we carried out in Sri Lanka, but unfortunately, USAID funding has been discontinued last, for this year beginning. So therefore, all the projects comes to a standstill. Even for that reason, we are unable to, continue with the certificate course, because that is also funded by the USAID. So that inadequate funding is an issue. And also now sometimes some donor agencies they're willing to provide, and there are some stringent procedures, so therefore we are not able to get those things. And there is a national anti-trafficking task force. I would say because it's inactive. The reason is that it has been established, and it comes under the Ministry of Defense. So Ministry of Defense is dominating, I mean, because it comes under that, the military personnel are dominating, although the other, agencies, Sri Lankan government, other agencies are part of it. Almost like 21 organization get the membership, but as the defense dominating the military personnel, and they do not have also much knowledge on this area. So there is no point of having a national anti-trafficking task force without any concrete actions. So when it comes to Canada, according to TIP report, Canada is fully meets the minimum standards, and the TIP report also gives some of the recommendations to Canada to improve. But for the time, I mean, as of now, I think it meet the minimum standards, because when the minimum standard, how they actually decide is identification, prosecution, and protection and prevention. There are four aspects. So in the four aspects, Canada meet the minimum standard. So that's what I wanted to learn, how we also wanted to at least meet the minimum standard and come to a tier 1. So Canada actually has a victim-centered approach. That is very important, because if they are already, the traffic victims are vulnerable and traumatized, and the majority of them are women and girls, and so therefore victim-centered, and we need to give training for the officials, so how to deal with the victim. Even in identification of victims, you need to adopt the victim-centered approach. But in Sri Lanka, it's a generalized approach for all the victims. So therefore, that is it's a good thing that I learned here. And the identification investigation, yes, it has been gradually increased. So we want to learn. Actually, we can have discussions. And in Canadian Embassy in Colombo, we have a liaison officer from RCMP. So I happened to meet him in 2023 for a discussion. So they are doing actually, they are helping Sri Lanka in, there are some joint investigations also take place. So I think we need to increase that. And also, I think in recently, 2025 January, the chief advisor on human trafficking has been appointed. I think the chief advisor's main role is to giving recommendations to the Minister of Public Safety on anti-trafficking efforts. So that's an important thing, because then you can make decisions and policy decisions and legislative decisions. So there is a dedicated person who can give recommendations. So increased funding. In the recent years, there are fundings and provincial level as well as the federal level. And a hotline, it's a multilingual support connecting to victims' emergency. And I just recall the Sri Lankan scenario. There are a lack of Tamil speaking officers. So therefore, people from Tamils mainly from north and east and the hill country, because when they even now if they call to any government departments, so if there are no Tamil speaking officers stationed, so they won't be able to get the services. So that is an issue there in Sri Lanka. And also here, I think I already mentioned certain provisions have provisions for civil suit. Manitoba, British Columbia, Alberta. I think because it is there, you can get compensation. Because even in criminal cases, there are limited compensation is given. But only thing is, if there is no conviction, it is very difficult to get a conviction. So if we can provide some, opportunity through legal provisions to sue against them in civil court, they can get the uh, civil remedy from the perpetrators. And also, I think 5-year national strategic plan for trafficking. I think 2019-24, that is now I think 2025 to 2030 it is there. And we do have under the National Anti-Trafficking Task Force, but it is not really made by a very lengthy consultative process. So therefore, there are a lot of issues remaining in the strategic plan. So what actually we can learn from Canada? I just briefly say, because I think we do not have provisions for cross border. I think I'm highlighting Canada has a IRPA has a particular section on cross border, and the penalties, when it comes to penalties, maximum penalties in Canada 14 years imprisonment. And also it's another good thing that in the federal law, they take into account the aggravating factors. For example, now if a person dies, or if it is a child, and serious human rights violation, so those aggravating factors are considered and maximum punishment is given, sometimes life imprisonment. But in Sri Lanka, we do not have any provisions for aggravated circumstances. However, according to the Aegis department, what they say is when they frame the charges, they add aggravating factors. But I would say that it is concretely we need to mention in legal provisions what are the aggravating factors and what are the punishment, proportionate punishment that has to be there. I think Canada has that. And the victims' rights, Canada Victims' Rights Bill has a comprehensive, rights. It's considered four core victims' rights, that is information, protection, participation. Sri Lanka also recently, 2023, I would say the law is really remarkable because it has been made according to international standards and best practices from other countries, but only it just remain as a paper, but there are a lot to be done. In identification, I think we need to have a lot of training from we need to learn lessons from, because the police and social workers here, immigration officers, and they have they are giving a lot of training, but we do not have that. And also we have a standard operating procedure for identification that is outdated, so we need to do some thing to upgrade that. And as I mentioned, shelter, Canada has safe house, and we have here court protections and medical services, addiction support. And I think some of the reference some of the literature, when I looked at, there are also some issues. It says that there are limited protection services as far as the foreign victims are concerned, but there are also some issues are there. But still I would say that we Canada has a considerable number of measures. And the another important aspect that I highlighted in red, victims are not required to cooperate in criminal justice. They are not really wanted to testify against the traffickers. That's a very good thing, I think, because if they testify against them, then it is their life is under serious threat. I think we also need to think about, and the training is almost like we give them, and but they actually, because they are under pressure to finish their investigation and prosecution, they also try to convince the victims to give information and testify against the trafficker. So that is a serious problem in Sri Lanka. So I think we need to do away with that. And the child protection also, because child, we have dedicated to government agencies, but when it comes to implementation, weak implementation, the major problem, when we talk to them and when we interview them, actually they say we do not have much knowledge on human trafficking. So that's a serious problem. I think we because if we do not do that as a first thing, the awareness creation, even if you have a law, even if you have other measures, but we can't implement because of the lack of knowledge. International trafficking, of course, as I said, Canada, US, Australia, Middle East countries are major destination for Sri Lankans. Sri Lankan embassies in these countries facilitated when they find people are in problem. Um, uh, and also the cooperation from the host countries. But we do not have particular provisions on cross-border trafficking. And then again, for that international trafficking, Canada actually they give temporary residence permit and work. I would not suggest that to Sri Lanka, because it's not possible for us, because it is a developing country. We have a lot of, but at least for foreign victims, if you identify, they have to be referred to the foreign relevant foreign embassy or whatever the ministry. They you need to give a temporary protection for them until that the country, source country, takes some action because we can't give work permit in. But at least we need to respect, and we should not have bias against the foreign victims. We need. So when I talk to the protection division, head of the protection division in Sri Lanka, so he says even GBV we don't entertain foreign victims to the shelter. I asked why. He said because the protection shelter is situated in a village, interior village. So if we just because that is nobody knows that is a shelter, so we just run as a government office. Nobody knows. But if we station the foreign victims, so the out of curiosity they might search button, then the confidentiality is go. But I said no. At least somewhere you need to have give some protection for the foreign victim. But temporary protection is there. They are in Sri Lanka also not. I don't think not up to the standard. And collaboration, of course, we need to have the multi-agency coordination and collaboration is important, right? That is I said that anti-trafficking task force has all these organizations because of it comes under the Ministry of Defense. And also when we talk to the government office, they blame each other. So they say we don't have lack of because they do not have a kind of demarcated responsibilities particularly given to each. Sometimes they duplicate the functions. So that is therefore the coordination and collaboration also I think we need to do something in Sri Lanka. um, and the holistic approach to the support and rehabilitations, I think the Canada has a holistic approach. And we need to adopt that also. And also awareness and training. I said I think number of times. So that is very, it's not only for police and so even healthcare. Because sometimes the victims when they go to hospitals, the doctors can identify the victims. If they go unidentified, it is a serious issue. Therefore I think the healthcare, social services, and the schools, because the school principals, teachers, everyone has to be given training. Sometimes the victim are being identified in schools sometimes. So the awareness and training for the general public as well as the law enforcement is very much important. So I think based on this, I would like, I don't know to what extent that we can do because it depends on resources and things. But if we can try with international cooperations and bilateral agreements with some countries, I think we can do that, these things. So the livelihood program for reintegration of victim survivors, that is very important. As of now, we find job opportunities only through a Foreign Employment Bureau. If there is a victim with a high threat, we send, say Foreign Employment Bureau try to send them abroad. But I think the government also give other opportunities with private partnership, private job partnerships, educational and vocational, because they have to in the social integration is important. So once they lose everything, they lose their confidence, they lose their property, everything. So what is their life, what is their future? So educational and vocational training, enhanced skills, those things are, because in the shelter, I think in Canada, in the shelters they teach to certain extents the skills and job training. So those are important for them. And victim centered approach, that's another. And community outreach programs, handbook for Canada has a very good handbook for law enforcement with practical guidance. I think we need to have a handbook in maybe in a simple very language, in a national language, Sri Lankan. We can translate into Tamil and Sinhala, so we can give. And improve accessibility of police station person with disabilities, because when the person with disability go, they do look down. That is still, I think, the Sri Lanka, it's a worst. Like, so the person with disabilities, they do not like to go to the public places because they are not really given priority. They look down, so that is human centric approach is not there even in the police. I think, and another thing, labor receiving countries, because we are mainly depending on the remittance from abroad. So we do have to have direct communication channels, international cooperations, and formalized data collection. I think even Canada, the TIP report 25 suggests that even in Canada, there is no formalized data collection. I mean, centralized data collection where you just pick number of investigations, and because the data is also scattered here and there, provincial levels as well as the federal level. So every country need to have a formalized data collection and regular assessment of anti-trafficking initiatives and identify gaps. And we need to do a lot of researches also, initiatives, and we need to identify these things. Uh, so with that, I think these are the things I just recommend. I am developing this paper, so I have to do a lot more. I need to study and do. And thank you very much for giving this opportunity. So I welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.